The world has a strange habit of mistaking grease for failure and a quiet heart for weakness. But sometimes 5 minutes are enough to expose the most expensive mistake in the room. The massive convention center in Seattle buzzed with polished confidence as executives, investors, engineers, and reporters gathered beneath dazzling lights for one of the country's most anticipated engineering showcases. Giant digital displays counted down to the unveiling of a revolutionary propulsion prototype, while cameras drifted across crowds dressed in tailored suits worth more than many families spent on rent in a month. Luxury cars filled the reserved parking area outside. Conversations floated through the lobby about billion-dollar contracts and future technology, and every face seemed eager to witness history. Then the automatic doors opened, and Ryan Carter quietly stepped inside wearing faded work boots, dark jeans, and a weathered mechanic's jacket stained with years of honest labor. His dark brown hair was neatly combed despite the early morning rush. His angular face carried the calm confidence of someone who had learned not to waste energy explaining himself, and his sturdy frame suggested years spent lifting engines instead of attending executive meetings. Holding the hand of his 9-year-old son Noah, Ryan paused only long enough to check the event schedule before continuing toward the registration area. Noah looked around with wide eyes, fascinated by towering displays of aircraft engines and interactive technology exhibits. "Dad, this place is huge," he whispered with a smile. Ryan simply nodded. "Stay close, buddy." They moved quietly through the crowd, almost invisible until they reached the front desk, where several attendees glanced toward Ryan's oil-stained jacket before looking away with polite discomfort. A few murmured assumptions drifted through the air, believing he must have been part of the maintenance crew preparing the venue. Ryan ignored every glance. He had seen those expressions before. Across the lobby, Emily Dawson descended a wide staircase surrounded by company executives. At 32, the celebrated CEO carried herself with effortless authority, her tailored red business dress reflecting confidence rather than extravagance. Her chestnut hair rested neatly across her shoulders as she reviewed presentation notes on a tablet without slowing her pace. Investors greeted her with admiration while photographers captured every smile. She represented success, precision, and ambition, the kind of leader magazines placed on their covers. As Emily approached the registration desk, her eyes briefly settled on Ryan standing beside Noah. She paused for only a second before quietly asking the event coordinator, "Is the maintenance team still working in the lobby? The presentation starts soon." The coordinator looked uncertain. Ryan calmly handed over his invitation. Emily noticed the official guest credential hanging from his lanyard and frowned ever so slightly, unable to understand why a small-town mechanic had been invited to one of the nation's most exclusive engineering competitions. Before anyone could say another word, every screen inside the convention hall suddenly illuminated with bold white letters announcing the beginning of the $5 million engineering challenge, and the room fell into complete silence as every eye turned toward the stage, unaware that the least impressive-looking man in the building was about to change everything. The announcement echoed through the convention hall, followed by a wave of applause as the master of ceremonies stepped onto the brightly lit stage. He welcomed innovators from across the country before introducing the centerpiece of the event, a next-generation aircraft propulsion system that had consumed years of research and millions of dollars in development. A towering silver curtain slowly lifted to reveal the sleek prototype resting beneath crystal-clear lights, its polished metal reflecting the anticipation on hundreds of faces. Engineers leaned forward in their seats while investors exchanged confident smiles, believing they were about to witness the future of aviation. Ryan Carter remained standing near the back with Noah beside him, quietly studying every angle of the machine instead of the presentation. His eyes drifted across the intake housing, the alignment of the mounting brackets, the ventilation channels, and the subtle wear marks surrounding several fasteners that almost no one else seemed to notice. Noah looked up at his father and whispered, "Do you think it is as amazing as everyone says?" Ryan smiled gently before answering, "Every machine tells the truth if you are patient enough to listen." Noah nodded, even if he did not fully understand what his father meant. On stage, the lead engineer proudly explained that dozens of experts had tested the prototype for months, Yet one mysterious performance failure continued to prevent certification. Computer simulations had failed to identify the cause. Artificial intelligence models had produced conflicting conclusions. Independent consultants had exhausted every possible theory. The presenter paused dramatically before revealing the challenge. Whoever could correctly identify the hidden defect and explain why it occurred would immediately receive a $5 million prize along with national recognition. Excitement swept through the audience. Dozens of engineers instantly opened laptops while others rushed toward technical displays filled with charts and diagnostic data. Emily Dawson watched the organized frenzy with complete confidence. She believed the answer would come from one of the elite specialists already collaborating with her company. As she glanced across the room, she noticed Ryan standing perfectly still without a computer, without a notebook, and without any visible urgency. He simply observed the prototype from a respectful distance, as though the noise around him had completely disappeared. Emily quietly folded her arms before speaking to a colleague. Confidence without preparation usually ends in embarrassment. Her colleague smiled politely and agreed. Ryan heard neither comment because his attention remained fixed on the engine. The presenter announced that participants had exactly 5 minutes before the first round of evaluations would begin. A massive countdown clock appeared on every screen. 300 seconds. The room exploded into movement. Some competitors argued over equations while others debated airflow models and software algorithms. Ryan slowly walked a few steps closer, carefully listening as the demonstration engine briefly powered on for another diagnostic cycle. His expression never changed, but no one noticed something familiar. Whenever his father repaired engines at the neighborhood garage, he always became this quiet just before discovering a problem that everyone else had overlooked. Ryan tilted his head slightly as another low vibration echoed through the hall. He closed his eyes for only a moment, opened them again, and looked directly toward a small section near the rear housing. A faint smile appeared on his face. 5 minutes suddenly felt like more than enough. The countdown continued to shrink above the stage as conversations grew louder and more desperate. 3 minutes remained. Engineers surrounded the prototype with tablets, laser measuring devices, and complicated diagnostic software, each hoping to become the first person to solve the mystery that had defeated some of the brightest minds in the industry. Ryan Carter stood several feet away, saying nothing. His attention never drifted from the rear section of the engine, where an almost invisible vibration appeared every few seconds before disappearing again. Noah quietly watched his father with complete trust. He had seen that same focused expression countless times inside the small neighborhood repair shop, whenever a customer brought in a vehicle that no one else could fix. Ryan finally took a slow step forward and politely raised his hand. A nearby event official noticed him immediately. "Sir, participants must remain behind the marked line unless they receive permission." Ryan smiled respectfully. "I understand. I do not need to touch it. I only need one question answered." The official hesitated before nodding. "Go ahead." Ryan looked toward the engineering team. "Has the vibration always appeared after the engine reaches operating temperature, or did it begin after the third redesign?" Several engineers exchanged confused looks. One searched through the testing records before quietly answering. "It first appeared after the third redesign." Ryan thanked him and stepped back. Emily Dawson observed the exchange with growing curiosity. She expected an ordinary mechanic to ask about horsepower, fuel systems, or visible components. Yet his question focused on the exact point where the project timeline had changed. She quickly dismissed the thought. Luck sometimes sounded like expertise. The countdown reached 120 seconds. Suddenly, Ryan spoke again, his calm voice carrying farther than he intended. "The problem is not inside the engine core." Several nearby participants stopped typing. "It is inside the assumption that created the redesign." Silence spread across the nearest rows. One senior engineer frowned. "That is impossible. We tested every revised component." Ryan nodded politely. "I believe you did. But sometimes every measurement is correct because everyone is measuring the wrong thing." The words lingered in the air. Emily folded her arms more tightly. She had built an entire career on data, precision, and measurable results. What Ryan suggested sounded almost unreasonable, yet something about his certainty unsettled her. The lead judge approached Ryan with professional curiosity. "Do you believe you know the answer?" Ryan looked toward the prototype once more before replying. Yes. But before I explain it, I would like to see one document. Which document? The judge asked. Ryan answered without hesitation. The original blueprint from before the third redesign. A murmur rolled across the audience. That blueprint had never been displayed during the competition because it was considered outdated. Emily's expression changed for the first time. Very few people outside the original design committee even knew there had been 3 major redesigns. The judge quietly instructed an assistant to retrieve the archived drawings. As the assistant disappeared backstage, Noah noticed a small silver emblem engraved near the base of the prototype, partially hidden beneath the display platform. He tugged gently on his father's sleeve and whispered, "Dad, that little symbol looks familiar. I have seen it on the old toolbox in our garage." Ryan glanced at the emblem for only a second before gently squeezing Noah's shoulder. "Yes," he said, softly, his voice almost impossible to hear. "I know exactly where it came from." Emily caught only that final sentence, but not the reason behind it. She had no idea that the tiny forgotten emblem was connected to a secret buried years earlier, one that would eventually change not only the outcome of the challenge, but the entire story behind the engine itself. The assistant returned carrying a large protective portfolio that had obviously spent years inside an archive rather than on display. The room, once filled with constant conversations and hurried calculations, gradually settled into an uneasy silence as the lead judge carefully unfolded the original engineering blueprint across a long presentation table. Its edges had faded with age, handwritten notes filled the margins, and several revisions had been marked with different colors of ink. The judge looked toward Ryan Carter with quiet curiosity. "This is the earliest complete version we have on file. Very few people have ever requested to see it." Ryan stepped forward only after receiving permission. He did not rush. He did not pretend to impress anyone. His eyes slowly moved across the drawing, studying every line as though he were greeting an old friend after many years apart. Emily Dawson remained nearby with folded arms, watching every movement more carefully than before. She expected hesitation. Instead, Ryan's expression grew calmer with each passing second. He finally pointed toward a small reinforcement bracket located near the rear housing. "This piece does not belong here," he said quietly. Several engineers immediately objected. One shook his head. That bracket was added during the third redesign to increase structural stability. Ryan nodded respectfully. That is exactly when the problem began. Another engineer stepped forward. "The simulations proved the modification improved durability." Ryan looked directly at him without arrogance. "The bracket itself is not the failure. It changes the natural vibration pattern just enough to create harmonic resonance after the engine reaches operating temperature. Every sensor measures normal performance because the individual parts remain within acceptable limits. The complete system is what becomes unstable." The engineering team exchanged uncertain glances before opening test records again. One specialist compared vibration graphs from the earliest prototype with the latest redesign. His confident expression slowly disappeared. "The frequency shift," he whispered almost to himself. Another engineer leaned over the data and quietly added, "We never compared the complete resonance pattern because we assumed the redesign solved the original concern." The lead judge looked toward Ryan once more. "How did you recognize something that dozens of experts overlooked?" Ryan smiled gently. "Machines leave clues. People often stop listening when the numbers begin agreeing with each other." Emily felt the words settle heavily in her thoughts. For the first time that morning, she was no longer looking at Ryan as a mechanic who had wandered into the wrong event. She was looking at someone who understood the engine in a way that seemed almost impossible. While technicians hurried to compare Ryan's explanation against archived performance records, Noah quietly wandered a few feet closer to the blueprint. His eyes settled on a handwritten signature hidden beneath an old approval stamp. "Dad," he whispered softly, "that handwriting looks exactly like the notes inside your garage notebook." Ryan gently folded the edge of the portfolio back into place before anyone else noticed the signature. "Some stories take longer to tell than others," he replied with a calm smile. Noah accepted the answer without another question. Emily overheard only part of the exchange, catching the word notebook, but missing the reason behind it. Across the hall, Technicians suddenly projected new diagnostic charts onto the giant display screens. Every calculation now aligned perfectly with Ryan's explanation. The impossible defect had finally been identified. Yet as applause slowly began to rise throughout the convention center, the lead judge continued staring at the faded signature on the original blueprint, his expression changing as though he had just remembered a name that history had quietly forgotten. The applause faded almost as quickly as it had begun because curiosity had replaced celebration. Engineers who had spent months searching for an answer gathered around the original blueprint with expressions that shifted from confidence to disbelief. The lead judge carefully traced the faded signature near the bottom corner with one finger before looking back at Ryan Carter. "This design review was completed 12 years ago," he said quietly. "Most of the people who worked on this project have retired or moved on." Ryan remained calm. Good engineering does not disappear just because time passes. The judge nodded slowly, then addressed the technical review committee. "Verify every document connected to the original design before we announce the official winner." The committee immediately agreed. While they disappeared into a secure archive room, the audience waited in an unusual silence. Nobody returned to their laptops. Nobody argued over equations anymore. Every conversation now centered on the quiet mechanic who had solved the country's most difficult engineering challenge with careful observation instead of expensive software. Emily Dawson stood only a few feet away, watching Ryan speak softly with Noah. The little boy looked proud, not because his father had impressed hundreds of strangers, but because he had simply watched his father do what he had always done at the neighborhood garage. "You already knew the answer when the engine started, did you not?" Noah asked with innocent curiosity. Ryan smiled. "I knew where to begin looking. That is different from already knowing the answer." Noah considered the lesson carefully before nodding. Emily heard every word. She realized Ryan never claimed to be the smartest person in the room. He only respected the process enough to let the machine reveal the truth. That quiet humility unsettled her far more than confidence ever could. Several minutes later, the review committee returned carrying additional folders recovered from the archive. One senior historian placed an aged maintenance journal beside the blueprint. The judge slowly opened it, turning several fragile pages before stopping on a familiar sketch. The room became perfectly still. The same reinforcement bracket appeared in the drawing, accompanied by handwritten notes warning that adding it could introduce harmonic resonance after prolonged operation. The warning had been clearly documented long before the third redesign, yet it had somehow been overlooked years later when new management approved revisions. Emily stepped closer, unable to hide her surprise. "Someone predicted this exact failure?" she asked quietly. The historian answered, "Not someone. The original design review team." Ryan lowered his eyes for a brief moment, saying nothing. The judge compared the handwriting inside the journal with the signature on the blueprint. Then he looked toward Ryan once again, his expression filled not with suspicion but recognition. "There is something about this writing," he said softly. "It reminds me of another engineer whose work disappeared from the public record after a family tragedy." Ryan offered only a polite smile and gently placed his hand on Noah's shoulder. He made no attempt to explain the connection. He did not ask for credit. He did not interrupt the investigation. Emily watched him in growing disbelief. Any other competitor would have demanded immediate recognition after solving the challenge. Ryan seemed completely at peace letting the truth arrive on its own. As officials prepared the final verification before announcing the winner, the forgotten journal remained open beneath the bright convention lights, its faded handwriting quietly waiting for someone to recognize that the greatest secret in the building was never hidden inside the engine at all, but inside the identity of the man who had just solved it. The convention hall remained unusually quiet as members of the technical review committee gathered around the archive table, comparing every handwritten note, engineering calculation, and approval record recovered from storage. The giant countdown clock had long disappeared from the display screens, replaced by technical diagrams showing exactly how Ryan Carter's explanation matched the newly verified vibration analysis. Every graph confirmed the same conclusion. The hidden flaw had never been caused by a defective component. It had been introduced by a well-intended redesign that ignored a warning written years earlier. The lead judge slowly closed the maintenance journal before looking across the audience. Our committee has completed the first stage of verification, he announced. The proposed solution presented by Mr. Ryan Carter is technically correct. A wave of applause filled the hall, but Ryan simply thanked the committee with a respectful nod. Noah smiled proudly beside him, yet Ryan gently reminded him, "We still wait until every fact has been confirmed." His son nodded. "Because the truth deserves patience." Ryan smiled. "Exactly." Emily Dawson listened to their conversation with growing admiration. The confidence she had displayed earlier that morning had quietly transformed into thoughtful humility. She approached Ryan without the audience noticing. "May I ask you something?" she said. Ryan turned politely. "Of course." Emily hesitated for a brief moment before speaking. Most people would already be celebrating. "Why are you so calm?" Ryan looked toward the engine resting beneath the convention lights. "Because winning matters less than making sure the answer helps the people who will trust their lives to this machine one day." Emily lowered her eyes for a moment. She had spent years measuring success through quarterly reports, investor confidence, and market growth. Hearing someone place responsibility above recognition challenged something deep inside her. Before she could reply, the committee chairman returned carrying one final sealed archive box that had not been opened in years. A quiet murmur spread through the audience as he carefully broke the security seal and removed a thin personnel file protected inside a transparent sleeve. "This document was stored separately because it contains confidential employment records," he explained. "We only requested it after discovering the engineering notes." He compared the signature inside the personnel file with the handwriting on the original blueprint and the maintenance journal. Every stroke matched perfectly. Several committee members exchanged astonished glances. One elderly engineer slowly stood from his seat, adjusting his glasses as recognition appeared across his face. "I remember that handwriting," he said softly. He was the youngest systems engineer on the original project. His resonance model prevented a catastrophic design error before the first prototype was ever built. The audience listened in complete silence. Emily looked back at Ryan, searching his face for an explanation, but he remained perfectly still. The elderly engineer continued speaking. After his wife became seriously ill, he resigned without asking for recognition. "We heard he disappeared from the aerospace industry and never returned." Noah quietly looked up at his father, understanding for the first time that the stories he had heard at bedtime about solving impossible mechanical puzzles had not been imaginary lessons after all. Ryan gently squeezed his son's shoulder without saying a word. The chairman slowly opened the final page of the personnel file and read the name written beneath the original employment record. His expression immediately changed from curiosity to certainty. He looked directly at Ryan, then back at the audience, taking a slow breath before announcing that the committee had just uncovered evidence suggesting the quiet mechanic standing before them had once been one of the very engineers responsible for creating the foundation of the aircraft system everyone believed had been designed by someone else. No one spoke for several long seconds after the chairman closed the personnel file. The silence carried more weight than applause ever could. Hundreds of people who had entered the convention center expecting to celebrate innovation now found themselves witnessing something far more remarkable. The quiet mechanic standing beside his son was no longer simply a contestant. He had become the missing chapter of the very story everyone believed they already knew. The chairman stepped toward Ryan Carter with genuine respect. "Mr. Carter, before this committee proceeds with the final decision, would you be willing to tell us why you left a career that many believed would shape the future of American aviation?" Every camera in the room turned toward Ryan, yet he did not rush to answer. He glanced at Noah first, offering the same reassuring smile his son had seen every morning before school. "Some decisions are not made because one dream becomes less important," Ryan said calmly. "Sometimes they are made because someone else becomes more important." The audience remained completely still. Ryan continued in the same steady voice. "When my wife became seriously ill, I believe the greatest engineering challenge left in my life was not building better machines. It was becoming the father my son deserved." Noah quietly lowered his head, his eyes shining with gratitude. Emily Dawson felt an unexpected heaviness in her chest. She remembered the first moment she had seen Ryan that morning, judging his worn jacket before ever learning his name. The memory now embarrassed her more than any business mistake she had ever made. One of the younger engineers raised his hand. If your research was so valuable, why did you never return after everything you accomplished? Ryan answered without bitterness. Because every morning my son needed breakfast before the world needed another prototype. Every afternoon someone needed to pick him up from school. Every evening there was homework, dinner, and stories before bedtime. Engineering can wait for another brilliant mind. Childhood cannot wait for another father. Several people quietly lowered their eyes. Even the reporters who had spent the morning searching for dramatic headlines stopped typing for a moment. Emily slowly stepped forward until she stood directly across from Ryan. "I owe you an apology," she said sincerely. "I looked at your clothes and decided who you were before I learned anything about your character." Ryan smiled gently. "We all make quick judgments sometimes. The important part is deciding whether we are willing to change after learning the truth." Emily nodded, accepting the lesson without trying to defend herself. The chairman cleared his throat before addressing the audience once again. "There is one final matter that requires confirmation before we announce the official winner." He carefully lifted another document from the personnel file. Unlike the engineering notes, this page contained a legal agreement signed years earlier regarding intellectual property and original design contributions. The chairman studied it quietly, then looked towards several members of the review board. Their expressions immediately became serious. One attorney whispered something into his ear before pointing toward the signature at the bottom of the page. Emily noticed the exchange and wondered why a simple competition suddenly required legal verification. Ryan remained completely composed, almost as though he already knew what the document contained. Noah looked up at his father with quiet curiosity, but Ryan simply rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Across the hall, the giant display screens changed once more, replacing technical diagrams with the official competition seal as the judges prepared to reveal not only the winner of the $5 million prize, but a forgotten agreement that could completely transform the meaning of everything that had happened inside the convention center that day. The chairman carefully placed the legal agreement beneath a document camera, and within seconds, every screen inside the convention center displayed the faded pages for the audience to see. The room remained completely silent as the organization's chief legal counsel stepped forward to explain what had just been discovered. "This agreement was signed 12 years ago during the original development phase," she said calmly. "It states that if the original resonance safety model ever proved essential to correcting a future design failure, the engineer responsible would retain permanent recognition for the underlying concept regardless of later revisions." A quiet murmur spread across the audience. Emily Dawson looked from the screen to Ryan Carter, realizing that this was no longer only about a competition. It was about restoring credit that had quietly disappeared over the years. The legal counsel continued. "The archived engineering notes, maintenance journal, and verified signatures confirm that Mr. Ryan Carter authored the original resonance model and documented the exact warning that has solved today's challenge." The committee members unanimously nodded after reviewing every supporting document. The lead judge smiled warmly before turning toward Ryan. "Mr. Carter, this committee is honored to officially recognize both your solution and your original contribution to this technology." The audience rose to its feet almost instinctively, not because someone had instructed them to stand, but because respect had quietly replaced surprise. The applause felt different now. It was slower, deeper, and filled with genuine admiration rather than excitement. Ryan accepted the recognition with the same calm expression he had carried since entering the building that morning. He did not raise his hands in celebration. He simply thanked the committee and looked toward Noah, whose proud smile meant more than every camera pointed at the stage. The chairman then lifted an oversized ceremonial check displaying the $5 million award. Flashing cameras illuminated the stage while reporters prepared their headlines. "Mr. Carter," the chairman announced, "you are the official winner of today's engineering challenge." Another wave of applause filled the convention hall. Ryan accepted the check with both hands before pausing for a thoughtful moment. "May I say something?" he asked. The chairman immediately nodded. Ryan stepped toward the microphone, looking not at the cameras but at the engineers, students, mechanics, and apprentices gathered throughout the hall. "This award does not belong only to one person," he began quietly. "Every mechanic who spends hours solving problems no one notices, every technician who chooses safety over shortcuts, Every parent who goes to work before sunrise so their children can dream bigger than they ever could, they deserve to know that honest work always matters. The hall fell completely silent. Ryan continued, I will keep enough of this award to secure my son's future, but the rest will establish scholarships for students entering skilled trades and engineering programs who simply need someone to believe in them. Several young apprentices exchanged emotional glances. Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes, not because of the money, but because Ryan had transformed a personal victory into an opportunity for countless strangers. She slowly approached him after the applause settled. Our company needs people like you, she said sincerely. Ryan smiled politely. Thank you. Right now, my son still needs me more. Emily nodded with complete understanding. As photographers continued documenting the celebration, the elderly engineer quietly reopened the archived personnel file one final time. Tucked inside its back cover was a sealed envelope that none of the committee members had noticed before. Written neatly across the front were only 6 simple words. To whoever finally discovers the truth. The chairman carefully picked up the unopened envelope, realizing that the greatest surprise of the day might still be waiting inside. The chairman carefully held the sealed envelope in both hands as the convention hall became so quiet that even the soft rustle of paper seemed unusually loud. Every camera focused on the stage while hundreds of people waited to discover why someone had hidden a message inside a personnel file that had remained untouched for more than a decade. Ryan Carter stood beside Noah with the same quiet composure that had carried him through the entire day. He made no attempt to stop the chairman, and that calm confidence only deepened everyone's curiosity. The chairman slowly opened the envelope and unfolded a single handwritten letter. Time had slightly faded the ink, but every word remained perfectly readable. He cleared his throat before reading aloud. If this letter is ever opened, it means someone finally remembered to look beyond titles instead of talent. The greatest danger in engineering is not a mechanical failure. It is believing that status always speaks louder than truth. The audience listened without moving. The chairman continued reading. The young engineer who developed this resonance model deserves more credit than I can publicly give him today. His ideas will protect lives long after my own name is forgotten. If circumstances ever prevent him from finishing this work, I hope the future remembers his character before his profession. The chairman lowered the letter for a moment, visibly moved. He looked toward Ryan before quietly adding, the signature belongs to Professor Harold Mercer, the chief architect of the original aircraft program. A wave of astonishment swept across the room. Professor Mercer had become a legendary figure in American aerospace history, and his words carried enormous weight even years after his passing. Emily Dawson gently covered her mouth, realizing that one of the most respected engineers in the country had privately acknowledged Ryan's brilliance long before anyone else had recognized it. Ryan simply lowered his eyes with quiet gratitude. He taught me that machines reveal truth, Ryan said softly. But people reveal character. The audience answered with another standing ovation, this time lasting far longer than before. When the applause finally settled, Ryan folded the ceremonial check and handed it to Noah. Keep this safe, he said with a warm smile. It is not proof that we won. It is proof that kindness and honest work are never wasted. Father and son slowly walked toward the exit together. Emily hurried after them, stopping only long enough to offer one final handshake. Thank you, she said sincerely. Today you reminded me what leadership is supposed to look like. Ryan returned the handshake with genuine respect. Then today was worth far more than any prize. As the afternoon sunlight poured through the glass entrance of the convention center, Ryan and Noah quietly walked toward their aging pickup truck parked far from the reserved executive spaces. Reporters remained behind interviewing judges while executives discussed scholarships and future partnerships inspired by Ryan's decision. The noise of celebration gradually faded behind them. Noah climbed into the passenger seat, carefully holding the folded check while Ryan placed an old metal toolbox into the truck bed. As he closed the lid, the camera crews never noticed the small brass nameplate fastened inside the box. It read, Property of Mercer and Carter Experimental Research Laboratory. The laboratory had never officially existed in any public record because before Professor Harold Mercer died, he had secretly made Ryan an equal founding partner, a decision known only to the two men. The forgotten envelope had restored Ryan's reputation, but the hidden nameplate quietly revealed an even greater truth. The humble mechanic had never merely worked beside a legend. He had helped create one, and he had carried that honor in silence every single day without needing the world to know.